Okay, so this thing that we're going to look at now is also on our website, so you can refer to it. It's an outtake from the book that we started with, No Plastic Sleeves. So, by the way, where does No Plastic Sleeves come from? Anybody? No, it used to be. It used to be really classic in Portfolio. You would get portfolio pages that would fit into either a binder or a post and screw, anything like that, whatever. They would be. It was a black piece of paper that was wrapped in a clear acetate protective sleeve, and you would slide your prints underneath it. And the problem with it was that they had horrible glare on them, but they would also get really scratched up really quickly. And so the no plastic sleeves came from trying to get people to stop doing things just like that. Okay. So anyway, this is also on our website, so you guys can simply take a look at it again. I'm going to just touch on things really briefly. You can get more into depth with this, but it's just things that you should consider for your portfolio. And the first thing that they talk about in here is binding, and the first option that they have in here is glued back to binding. And so a lot of you guys know that there are different, well, magazines are a perfect example of what they call perfect binding. And in magazine, what happens is that instead, it used to be in the old days, I'll show you an illustration of it, that this is, again, you won't see this on the video, but you'll hear it. It used to be that when they would bind things like this, they would take a piece of paper like this, a press sheet like this, and they would fold it in half. Well, they would print it first, but then when they went to bind it, they would fold it in half, and then they would take the next sheet of paper and they would fold this in half, and then they would tuck this first one inside the second one, and they would do, a lot of people would do staple binding, that kind of stuff here, and so you would have leaves that would be like this. The problem with this method is that you end up, the pages actually build, but this double part right here, the binding edge itself starts to swell and it gets really big. So this is really limited to only doing, you can do like 10, 15 pages before. What ends up happening is that this swells so much, like your book never wants to close. It always hangs out like this. So then one of the first perfect bindings that they started to do is they pulled this part apart and they would stack these instead. And when they would stack them instead, then you would have a whole stack of these guys, and the binding would never get any bigger. I mean, it would grow, but so would the width of your entire portfolio or book or magazine would grow as well. And then they would just do a perfect glue edge, a binding edge on this, and it would be, your book would like lay flat. It would seem square. Then they got even more sophisticated with it. And they actually started to cut these into individual sheets, so there was no longer a fold here. It was simply individual sheets that were all then lined up together and all glue bound. So that's what glue binding would actually be in this. You can actually have it. Have any of you guys ever done any of the book publishing, like Apple Book or Blurb or any of that kind of stuff? They're all options that you've got to actually print a portfolio, and a lot of people consider, oh wait, did you bring your portfolio? Yes. Could we look at that right now before we go any further? So, or at least let's start the process. This is one of Jenny's portfolios. Could you actually pass that guy around? Now, in Jenny's case, it looks like this again would be, this is probably the first initial binding that I was talking about. Has that got a staple binding in it? Yeah. So it's done more like the original version that I was showing you of this. But if you could actually pass this guy around, I'm going to continue this lecture while we're actually passing this around and looking at it, and then we can actually all have a conversation about it at the end. So at any rate, that would be the initial set of binding. Then there is spiral binding. And again, you can get this stuff done at Kinko's, that kind of stuff, whatever. They're not necessarily the most, the perfect thing for a portfolio unless your brand calls for something that a spiral binding would make sense to be part of your portfolio. Does that sort of make sense? So all of these decisions that we are making continue to go back again and again and again to your branding. Are you the perfect bound person? Are you the staple bound person? Are you the spiral bound person? Are you the Japanese hand-stitched binding method person? All of that has to do and is all driven by your branding. Who are you? Make sense? All right, so at any rate, spiral binding, there are all sorts of resources out there now that you can actually get. I was asking somebody about this before. Do you guys have a digital print center here? A center that actually prints stuff out and does binding for you and all that kind of stuff, whatever? It is an extraordinary resource. Michael is saying yes. Do we know where it is? Okay, wait. Okay, so I've got a yes, they're there, but I've also got they're really shitty. So wait a second. Wait. But why are they shitty?
Well, it's like they print really bad.
What, meaning what? Usually when people say that, they mean their color's off. Okay, so it's shitty print. Okay, so and then. Okay, well, so it just would be things to look into and think about, because there's other resources, places that you can go that actually do all of these other services that you might be able to take advantage of. And one of the amazing things is that imagine if you can get your portfolio costs down. Well, like, so for instance, this piece that is Jenny's right here, conceivably that can function as a leave behind for her. That's not her sole and only portfolio. So all of a sudden now she gets to give somebody a copy of her portfolio. Now, I'm not going to give that to everybody in the world, but somebody who's really important to me as a possible real serious contender as a client, I wouldn't hesitate to put the money in to do that. So in Jenny's initial run of this, I think you just said you did 50 of them? Yes. 50 portfolios. So how many portfolios should you really have? Minimum of... Yes, 50 copies of one. Okay, but that's, yeah, I'm talking about how many copies of your portfolio should you have? For me, I used to have 16. They were all 11 by 14 leather-bound books. I had 8 here in Chicago, 8 in New York, and there were times that they will all be out. Now, with web now, the demand to have that many out actually is considerably dropped, but if you only have a single portfolio, you are an idiot, because you took all the time to put that thing together. I actually had one of my portfolios was being sent by FedEx someplace, and somebody stole the truck. The whole FedEx truck. It wasn't like they were stealing my portfolio. They just took the whole truck, and that portfolio was gone. And so at any rate, don't try not to do just a single one portfolio. They get lost, they get chewed up, if you're gonna do it and put in the time to do the prints and all that, just bite it and do at least 2 of them to begin with. So at any rate, that deals with binding. There are other things that you can actually do. Stapled or sewn, that would be an example of a stapled one. Some people actually stitch through that. So again, instead of having staples along the spine, they literally run it through a sewing machine and it'll stitch down the entire side of it. This is the post and screw, and this is one, I'm going to zoom in on this because this is the one, a lot of people use this, and the reason post and screw is so, people like it so much is that it's very, very, very simple to edit. So this is what it looks like. I'm sorry, the picture of this is really dim, but this is, I don't know, it is what it is. So basically what these are, so you have, basically what happens is that you have got a front cover and you've got a back cover, and there's holes that are drilled through them, and there are screws that go in. They're literally screws with nuts on them that go through, and there's posts that go down through the middle of this. And they screw together, and they just, so you put your back cover down, you have posts that are sticking up through it, you lay all your pages on it, and then you put the top cover on, and then you put a nut on the top of it, and it all tightens it up, and then you've got a portfolio. But the advantage is that you can take it apart, and you can actually change pages out, which you cannot do with a perfect bound book. Once you get to a perfect bound book, or even the next version over, I'm going to show you a hand sewn book. It's not impossible, but it is a huge pain in the ass to try to edit it and change pages to move them in and out. So at any rate, and then this would be a hand-stitched Japanese, they call it stab binding version of this. I'll zoom in a little bit. There is a PDF if you're actually handy, and this is your brand. There's a PDF about actually how to do this stitching that's also on our website. But these are not the only things that you could actually consider for doing it. This is an example of a slip cover. I'm going to show you what that looks like in just a second in a little bit bigger version of this. So then your next thing that you need to consider is, are you going to do softbound or hardbound book? Now, Jenny's that's actually being passed around is softbound. So it just means that the cover is either, in this case, it's paper. There's an advantage to that in that you actually can print on it, so you can do all sorts of issues like that. But the other things that you could consider would be leather bound, so it would be hardbound. There's other things. There's a company called, and I've given you a whole series of resources for possible people that make portfolio. House of Portfolios in New York is the one that everybody in the world used to go to and still does. That's a big one. Anyway, there's a bunch of different possible options. You can do covers that are hardboard on the outside, that are wood on the outside. You can do acrylic that is on the outside. People have actually taken strata and put Formica on it on the outside to get a certain look, whatever. Again, all of these decisions would be determined by your brand. Are you an acrylic person? Does that fit what you're trying to show? Now, interestingly, Susan, in some of the work that she's got, there's times right now, and some of the work I think of that you're exploring right now is sort of got those you're looking at flowers through pieces of glass or lens material or rectilinear material. I don't know what that stuff is, but if that was a whole body of work that you had made out of that, you could consider using that as your cover material. It would make sense because it fits the kind of imagery that you're doing. You know, there's other people in here who have done other things. So I'm thinking of Connor and some of the stuff that he does. You know, he could do, his cover could actually be echo maybe some of the fabric or the material of some of the things that he shot in the studio. You guys get where this is all going, right? Right? Sure. Fair, sir. Anyway, then there's other things here, and we'll talk about these as well. There are, in the post and screw version, you can get pre-drilled paper. You can actually drill your own paper. However, you can also use what they call adhesive strips. They're these strips of adhesive material that actually tack on the edge of your paper that allow them to then fit inside of a post and screw. I will show you what those guys look like. Do you do a front closure on your book? That's what these things are, these issues right here in the beginning. So these would be some sort of class material on the opposite edge of the binding edge. These are not on the binding edge to keep your book closed. Again, this would be something that would be determined all by your branding. So these are just issues that you can actually look through and sort of ponder in this. Would be a stack stitch right here. And again, you guys, this PDF exists on there. Do you do embossing? A lot of people feel like covers that are embossed indicate sort of something that's more expensive, more a higher end, a higher quality. Do you want to start out that way, again, in terms of trying to present who you are? So are you the expensive photographer? Are you the cheap photographer? Does that sort of make sense? So anyway, things to consider in all of this. Now these I actually think are some of the most beautiful things to do, and these not only would work for a portfolio, but these would also be a possibility for some sort of promotion and leave behind. So these are actually, you can think about doing folded pages or flag pages. So this would be an example of a flag page where it's actually been cut, and as you go through the book, different things, so you can sort of imagine, I think what goes on in this particular book right here is it's a series of eyes, noses, and mouths, and as you start to flip different flags on this, it creates different faces as you go through the entire thing. So it's a little bit more experiential in that regard. This thing up here, in terms of these cutouts, one of the things that one of the most beautiful promo pieces I ever saw, because we're going to talk about promo pieces next week a little bit, but again, leave behinds. If you look at Jenny's right here, is your leave behind in there, Jenny? Is your postcard leave behind in there? Yeah, so if you take a look at her postcard leave behind, that is, so everybody take a quick look at that. The beautiful thing about that, what's smart about this, and the one thing I will tell you that's smart about that is that some people will actually do a promo piece like this and they'll have their contact information sitting right on top of their artwork, which ruins their artwork. Again, Jenny's got hers all on the back side of that so that somebody who really loves that image simply tacks that up to their board in their office, and they're constantly looking up at pictures that Jenny has actually done. And sooner or later, somebody's going to finally remember that and yank that thing off and say, I got to give this person a call. I'm interested in seeing what she can do, what we can do together for a piece. Does that sort of make sense? So one of the most interesting pieces that I ever saw that was done, again, because these things can get to be extremely expensive to do, somebody had taken a single press sheet like this. So imagine, imagine that this is a press sheet, and so what they had done was, they figured out all how to print this whole thing. So they'd taken a single sheet of paper like this, and they folded it down like this, and this was their promo piece. It looked just like this. And as you opened it up, it functioned like a book, And then you would flip this open, and it functioned like a postcard on both sides. And finally, you opened it up, and there was a single image right in the middle. And it was so incredibly smart and beautiful. And again, so the things that, and somebody said this to me once, this really is the thing that I should have tattooed on my ass, is that what you lack in money, you make up for in creativity. And this was a beautiful piece. This was something that somebody could actually print on their own using an Epson printer and double-sided paper and then just score it and fold it. But the layout part of it was just, it was stunning how it evolved. Anyway, it was really, really well done. So just throwing that part out there. So that gets us through sort of the material part of all of this. I've got one last thing to look at here, and it's this portfolio options. At least I hope it's this. Does this sound like me? No. I'm not a food for thought kind of person. John Morrison, but still, thanks again. So this would be a wooden version of this book. You can see it's a portfolio hinge, but this is still screw and post. The next one down, this was one that I thought was kind of interesting. This is actually sort of it's a box that's got an insert, and the box actually holds an iPad, and the iPad is actually the portfolio. So this is how it was actually delivered, and it looked like this. And again, would somebody who's wanting to do really sort of romantic period pieces for some romantic period fashion designer do this portfolio? No, why wouldn't they? Michael's sitting there going, I don't give a shit what, nobody should do that. No, again, it's their brand, right? It's their brand. If I'm like hardcore tech, photograph, only really high scale, scientific rocket shit, or you know, whatever, if that's who I am, then this might actually make sense. But at any rate, you guys get where this is going. Some of these can get really, really hyper involved. You can see this is actually not just wood, this is like serious hunks of wood. This would be what a slipcase looks like. This would be a softbound version. Again, you wouldn't be able to print like this on leather. And I think this is a quick piece on presenting portfolios, just to have something in mind. Actually, you guys can read this. We don't need to get through this part of it all. This is the last thing I wanted to show you is this, though. It is a whole series of portfolio sources. So Lost Luggage is one of the biggest ones. They were the first people to really come out with acrylic portfolio covers. So again, these would be all sources to actually have hand-built portfolio work. Some of these people you know, some of these people that you actually don't know. House of Portfolios, again, this is where I always used to go to. A lot of people go there in New York, and they're a really good resource for this stuff. There was a bunch of other designs in here. As we continue down here, some people will do presentation boxes, and this came up when we were looking at Michael's when we were trying to do his sequencing the other day, and he said, you know, last thing in the world I want to do is sequence my work. So the fact that he could actually then put it all, instead he could have loose single pieces that sat inside of a portfolio case or some sort of box, as it were, so that there was no real order to it, or so that there was no, and so that would be one advantage because of the way he wants to present it, but it would be another advantage in that it's incredibly easy to edit. If you need to swap something out, you're not taking shit apart and reprinting and trying to reorder and put back together and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, that's what these presentation boxes are about. And yeah, and this would be things about business cards, all that kind of stuff. So again, those resources exist for you. And oh, this is what I was looking for. Sorry, I actually used the wrong one of these, but I can get to the right one really quickly. So we've gotten through all of that part. We got through this part. We got through all of that. I just put that together. And that's, again, something for you to read. Yeah, and we got through all of that as well. So we're good to go on that part. Are there any questions about any of this stuff? Yes?
So because of the material I work with,
Right.
I always print glossy.
Right?
And those are look at it because you don't really want people to touch the paper because it's going to get sticky and kind of, so what do you really recommend?
No, this is a great, could you guys hear what Sarah just said? She does glossy prints. It doesn't matter what prints you do, they all get butchered. Every single one of them. No, but again, you've got to say to yourself, okay, I'm either not going to put a portfolio out, in which case you never work, or I'm willing to accept the fact that it's going to. I tell you this is just from personal experience. It's like I would get portfolios back and it's like, so what? You went to McDonald's and you had lunch on my fucking portfolio? I mean, shit would be creased, shit would be people spill coffee on it. I mean, it is what it is. It just happens and you just accept it and you know you can't send it back out. It's got to be redone and all that kind of stuff. So it's just something to keep in mind that you either do something that's a little bit more on the scale that where Jenny's was, where if that happens, she's got 49 others and she just kicks out the next one, or you do really sort of a higher end, again, post and screw, which is what most people do. I don't know if you watch those videos of from Lindsay Adler that are actually on our site. But take a look at those because she actually has a screw and post portfolio that is from House and Portfolio, and so you'll get some better idea of what it is. If somebody shoots me an email right now, I'll bring in a copy. I'll bring in one of my portfolios because it's screw and post, and you guys can see what it's like. Okay. There is something else that we should talk about really quickly here, and it is the kind of paper that you do print on. So there are portfolios that exist, and if you look through our resources, you can see, well, actually, let's just go to our website really fast so I can show this all to you. Yeah, that's right down here. So inside of here, these were where the worksheets was. So this is in our session 13. This is under the resources, and this is where all those templates were and that kind of stuff. This is where the portfolio resources are. Again, this is a list of people that you can actually go to get pre-built portfolios, that sort of thing. Here, this is the thing about drilled and scored inkjet paper. If you actually take a look at this, you'll see this is sort of what paper looks like that's actually been done that way. So I'm going to click on one of these and see if it won't take me. Sorry, these links should have remained hot, but they haven't. So I'm just going to copy one. So this is a sort of this is a really famous company, this Pina Zagaro. They do pre-built portfolios, and you can see they'll do ones in 8.5 by 11 portrait and regular. They also have pre-scored and drilled paper for this. The paper that all of them use for this stuff is Moab, it's not LaSalle, what is it? It is a LaSalle paper. This is the stock that everybody uses to do double-sided printing in the pre-drilled format of it. It is a resin-coated paper, so it's not a really high-end art paper. It's not like a math paper. It's got like a lustery kind of finish to it. It's not really a matte. It's not really a glossy. It's like the in-between average of everything. But it's still a reasonably good quality paper. Again, the feel of it seems to be still pretty nice, whatever. I'm an Entrada matte person myself, which is also a Moab paper, also a double-sided paper. Again, if you're only printing on one side of your pages, you don't need to worry about having a double-sided paper. But double-sided papers are hard to find. So it's just something to think about. And the pre-drilling and the pre-scoring is killer on this. So just so that you know, that part exists as well. There's other double-sided papers that they actually make, but again, without exception, in all of the pre-drilled versions, like this paper, so this group makes a version of it. There's other people that make a version of it, but pretty much all of them are that same Moab paper, just so that you guys know. We talked about doing this before. I personally find an 8.5 by 11 book is too small if you're doing a bound book or a leather bound book, that kind of thing. Screw and post, I think it's too small. If you're doing a self-printed piece like Jenny's, you can do any size. You can do much, much smaller, much, much larger. If you're Michael, you're going to do one that's a micro size. It's about the size of a postage stamp. No. I really had a promo piece that was done like that. People had done what theirs was. It was exactly the size of a 35 millimeter transparency. That was the size of it. And as you were to go through it, most of the images in it were exactly 35 millimeters. So it was like they had been pressed inside of it. And it was just stunningly beautiful. It was so smart. And it was so inexpensive to do because they were doing, that was the printing size. But nonetheless, anyway. 8.5 by, 11 by 14 is really sort of the standard. If you're going to 11 by 14, what some people will do is actually they'll do the 11 by 17. 11 by 17 is a little bit more friendly if you're doing all landscape. So I think of you, Jose, who's doing a lot of your cinematic stuff. A lot of it really lends itself to that sort of more horizontal landscape. That 11 by 17 might be something that would appeal to you more than the way 11 by 14, when it drops down, it's a little off. Whereas the 11 by 14 in portrait mode is like perfect. All right. Another thing that you should know about is this, and I know Moab makes this as well. There's a lot of matte papers. There are protective sprays for matte papers that will actually help fight fingerprints. So Moab makes one. It's called Desert Varnish, and this will work. It's not only for Moabs. This will work for any matte paper. It actually lays down, it doesn't change the reflective quality of your paper at all, but it actually does protect it, so it'll keep fingerprints off, that kind of stuff. It's not that fun to huff. I've tried. If you really want to get all fucked up in that, this is not your guy here. This is like, I don't know what the solvent is, but it's worthless. Did I ever tell you? No, I used to actually work on the horse race circuit. And I would drive around in a truck. We did a beer tent, and we would go around from city to city to major events. And one of the guys that I worked with was a huge huffer, and his mom was too. And his mom had huffed for so long, she'd gone completely blind. But they still did it, and he was lacquer thinner. He was like, no holds bar. I'm killing as many brain cells as I can every time. Anyway. Okay, on that happy note, all right, we can check that off. We can check that off. We can check that part off. Okay, so really quickly, I just want to throw this out. So, Sarah, you had actually gone ahead and turned in assignment 9.1. So here's the deal for assignment 9.1. It's a redo of 7.1. There may be a due date on it, but I hadn't graded your 7.1. That was the tonal retouching one. I had not graded that yet until the last time we all got together. So if you want to do 9.1, which is simply a redo of 7.1, it's to take it to the next level if you can. We will just make that due on Monday if you guys want to do it. If you do it, whatever the higher of your two grades of the two are becomes your grade for both. So it's just something to keep in mind. All right, so we got that, we got that. The next thing I need everybody to whip out their computer. We need to install that Nick software right now. We're going to talk about this. I'm going to stop the recording right now, not because I'm doing anything illegal, but, and we'll pick up the recording again in just a second.